What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the channel. I'm LotusAsakura, the one who never knows best, and in today's video I want to talk to you guys about the impact system in Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. Now, I've probably titled this video something along the lines of mastering every clash in Sparking Zero, and that's because clash and impact are the same thing. The impact system, if you're not aware, is the clash system or the clash mechanic in this game. So beam struggles, or when both players grab each other at the same time, or when you both dash into each other at the same time, or both use a rush super. You know how there's like a mini game that pops up? I wanted to make this video to serve as a guide for that and kind of clear up some confusion and misinformation I've seen about how these mini games work and function. And the goal here is that by the end of this video, you now understand how they work and can start winning them a little bit more often. I've gotten a lot of questions about this when I've been streaming over on Twitch, so I figured I would make a dedicated video for it to direct everybody here. Like I said, impact, clash, it's the same thing. So if I end up using these words interchangeably, hopefully you don't get too confused. I'll try to stay consistent. I think we're just going to say impact because that's what the game calls it. But for the sake of, searches and titles and stuff, I called it clash there. I'm probably going to mostly say impact in this video. Also, in this video, I will be going over how these mechanics function on both classic and standard controls. So regardless of which control scheme you play on, you should be able to find this video useful. Now with that, let's get into it. So Dragon Ball Sparking Zero has a total of 4 different impacts. You have the speed impact, the power impact, crash impact, and blast impact. And while this tutorial, which by the way, you'll probably notice that I'm using a lot of tutorial footage in this video, I highly recommend completing this tutorial if you haven't already. It's not the most in-depth, but it will at the very least teach you what all the different mechanics are and how some of them function. But when it comes to the impact specifically, while it tells you what triggers them and shows you a demonstration of what each one is, it doesn't really explain how to win the minigame. It kind of just throws it on screen and expects you to figure it out. And that's basically why I'm making this video, is to explain how to win the minigame. Up first, we'll be going over speed impact. So, as the tutorial will tell you, speed impact is caused by clashing with your opponent using a dragon dash, which on standard controls is R2 plus X, and on your classic controls will be L2 plus X. Speed impact can also be triggered by both players clashing with each other while using a rush super, so a non-blast super attack. On standard controls, when a speed impact is triggered, the first thing you'll see is a quick time event with the square button. The square button will be inside of a circle that is surrounded by a thin white ring that is closing in on the button. The objective here is to press the button when the ring is as close to the button as possible. It'll start off kind of slow, but once the ring enters that circle, it'll get significantly faster. Closer the ring is to the button, the bigger the advantage you have going into the next part. However, if you're too slow, the button will crack and it'll count as a failure. The next part of the minigame will still activate, but you'll be entering it with a disadvantage. The next part of the minigame is pretty simple. Just button mash square as quickly as you possibly can, and what you'll also notice on the first part and this part and every clash or impact in the game is that there's always the R2 button there and it says boost. This is another feature of the impact system that I should take the time to explain, because I've seen that some people don't understand this part either. Boost is basically something you can use to give an extra oomph to your inputs, basically acquire more power or more of an advantage in the impact or the clash. However, it's not without risk and it's not free. When you use boost, it will deplete your key gauge based on the number of times you've boosted from 1 to 3, with 1 being the minimum and 3 being the maximum. The more you boost, the more fatigued you'll be after the impact. And when you're fatigued, you're completely locked out of control of your character, meaning that even if you've won, you could be at a disadvantaged state and your opponent could recover a lot quicker than you do and potentially even win the game that way, whether it's by hitting you with a combo, charging up an ultimate, or really whatever they want, as you'll be completely defenseless during this time. So it's a bit high risk, high reward, and in my opinion is something that you should only use in a must-win situation, where if you lose this clash, you'll be dying, or if you win the clash, your opponent will be losing, thus winning you the match. In a lot of clash situations, I'll tend to tap it once, and in those must-win scenarios, I'll go up to 3 times. Sometimes I don't use it at all if I'm confident in my ability, like let's say if I've already beaten my opponent in an impact a couple of times already. But in my experience, I'm normally pretty safe just throwing 1 in there just for good measure. With that being explained, the speed impact will be won by whoever has acquired the most amount of advantage by doing these 3 things: timing the quick time event, mashing the button prompt more than their opponent, and using boosts. Now, when it comes to classic controls, the first part of this minigame is exactly the same, where you have to properly time the quick time event with the square button. However, the 2 key differences here are that your boost button is now L2 instead of R2, and the new minigame is spinning the analog sticks as quickly as possible as opposed to button mashing the square. If you've ever played a Budokai or Tenkaichi game in the past, you've probably done a beam struggle at some point and had to spin the analog sticks, and while it's pretty fun and nostalgic, I ain't gonna lie, this is a reason for me to play standard over classic, just because these controllers ain't cheap, stick drift is real, and I just feel like this is gonna wear out their sticks on your controller a lot. But hey, it's personal preference and it's up to you, and you also may find this easier or more difficult than the button mashing. I've seen some people prefer this, I've seen some people prefer the button mashing. It's really up to you. Up next, let's talk about power impact. Power impact is triggered when 2 players both try to grab at the same time. This is where you get that clash that looks like Frieza versus Vegeta on Planet Namek, where they grab each other's hands and then just kind of like flex their ki. I've seen a lot more confusion about this one than I have about the speed impact, so let's go over it. So first and foremost, a grab is performed on standard controls by hitting R1 plus square or XX on classic controls. Also, it's only just now dawning on me that I'm referring to everything specifically with PlayStation controls, because that's what I play on and I think that's where this game is the most popular, but hopefully you can still follow along if you play on Xbox or on an Xbox controller. As for how this minigame works, once it's activated on standard controls, you'll be greeted with this weird spiral. Once again with the square button, R2 button for your boost, and the game just basically tells you, figure it out. What you want to do here is hold the square button and get it as close to the top as you can without touching the edge. When this minigame starts, you'll see a black line surrounded by an orange outline that will be the barrier for how far you can charge your gauge. That is the limit. However, by boosting, you can increase this limit to the entirety of the gauge. Hold square and try your best to max this out without hitting the top, and if you do that better than your opponent, then you've won the minigame. This minigame actually happens to work the exact same way on both standard and classic controls, with the only difference being the boost button being L2 on classic. So let's move on to the next one. Up third, we have Crash Impact, and I think this one is by far the most confusing for everybody, and I've seen a lot of mixed opinions or statements on how this minigame actually functions. Now, I'm gonna be completely honest. I think I have finally figured it out, but I'll be honest and tell you that maybe I've misunderstood it as well. But at this point, with all the testing I've done in the tutorial and training mode and playing against friends, I'm pretty confident that this is actually how it works. So, a Crash Impact is triggered when two players step into each other. So if you both hit the X button, you'll trigger a Crash Impact. Upon triggering a Crash Impact, you'll be met with what appears to be a QuickTime event. And so the conclusion I've seen everybody draw is that the way you win this is by hitting the button as quickly as possible before your opponent. And that's almost right, but not quite it. Because what I've learned from, again, trying this out a lot is that if you actually hit the button too quickly, the button will crack and it results in failure, thus giving the advantage to your opponent, unless they also happen to mess up. What you'll notice is that there's actually a ring of light that flashes around the button. So instead of hitting the button right away, what you actually want to do is hit the button as soon as you see that flash of light. So you do want to be faster than your opponent, but only after that flash. That is actually how you win this minigame. If you're too fast, the button cracks. If you're too slow, the button cracks. So you really got to be quick and on point, and I think this is definitely the hardest one to master. But I think with better understanding, people will get a lot better at winning this one. Which I guess means other people will be losing more, but you get what I mean. During a Crash Impact, there will be a total of 3 prompts. Whichever player wins 2 out of those 3 will win the impact. Also, you'll be able to tell which player is winning not only by the animation, but also there will be a flash of light in the direction of the player who won. If you look closely, it's basically pointing to the player that won the impact. It's a small detail that I didn't notice at first, but again, this is the one that I spent the most time trying to figure out because I was winning at first, but I didn't really understand why I was winning. And I wanted to so that I could make this video. Because almost everybody I saw talking about it always said, oh, you just gotta hit the button as quickly as possible, but I realized that that wasn't really true. This one again functions the exact same way on classic controls, with the only difference again being the boost button. The fourth and final impact is Blast Impact, better known to most of us as a beam struggle. So a beam struggle or blast impact is performed when 2 players both clash with beam or beam-like supers. So this can be a Kamehameha and a Kamehameha and a Big Bang attack, or as the tutorial will demonstrate, Gohan's Kamehameha and Piccolo's Hellzone Grenade. On standard controls, you'll be met with a gauge where the meter fills up automatically. And so similar to the power impact, you want to get the meter as close to the edge as possible without hitting it. But instead of holding the button, you tap the button. Also similarly, if you hit the boost button, you can increase the limit. However, instead of filling the gauge up once, you want to do it multiple times. The meter will start filling up again after you've tapped the button once, and whoever can fill up the meter the most amount between you and your opponent will win. Now, it is worth noting that if you boost this gauge and increase the limit to which you can fill up the meter does not speed up, meaning that you're gonna have to hit the button earlier by the time you get to your 3rd attempt in order to still acquire more meter added to your advantage. And while I'm not getting into blast impacts like every game, I'm definitely winning it more often than not, and I can only assume that most people haven't quite figured it out yet. I originally thought that on classic controls this would once again be spinning the analog sticks, but much to my surprise, it actually functions the exact same way on both standard and classic. If you've played any of the older Budokai games, this probably isn't a system that's too foreign to you because it's kind of like when you would use an ultimate back in those games and you try to fill up your gauge and get as much power as possible, and your opponent would try to defend, and then whoever filled their gauge up more would be the winner. It's pretty much the same thing. The difference here is that since we're online, it's not showing both gauges, so you don't really see who wins until the animation plays out. But yeah, that's that. That is a breakdown of the impact or clash system in Sparking Zero. I'm sure there are people out there who already knew this information, but I know for a fact there are plenty of people out there who didn't, so hopefully somebody out there found this information useful. If you did, I'd appreciate it if you guys hit this video with a like, subscribe if you haven't already so you can stay tuned for all the awesome content I'm bringing you. And with all that being said, that's pretty much all I have for today. And remember, nothing can happen until you swing the bat. Later.